Hello, shalom and marhaban. You're listening to Yalla, the podcast which works to combat lies, confront misconceptions, and hopefully, if I've done my job, challenge you to think deeper about things. I'm Amie, your friendly neighborhood biblical resource writer, and I'm so happy you've chosen to spend some time with me today. What if the strongest man in the room never raised his voice? In a world obsessed with winning, proving, and shouting louder, what if strength looked more like stillness? What if real power wasn't found in the ability to dominate, but rather restrain? We've been taught that the meek get left behind, that softness is weakness, that power belongs to the powerful, which is often defined by the one who fights the hardest. But what if history, and perhaps your own life, tells a different story? A story where the most dangerous warrior isn't the one who strikes first, but the one who knows when not to. Today, I want to explore this idea of true meekness, what it actually means, why it's so vital in a world that can't stop promoting noise, and where we find it. What is real meekness? I think we all have this idea of what we think it is. Some of us like to almost romanticize the word or the idea of meekness or humility, but often it's misconstrued as weakness. And why is that? Does Hollywood or the media's almost constant bombardment of loud and proud and fight for your right, or even in the sense the you do you mentality, have anything to do with this? Our society right now speaks so much of inclusivity, this almost utopian idea that everyone has a voice, every opinion has equal authority. Speak up and don't let the man bring you down. What about feminism? This idea has become, I think, in modern times, like sticking it to the man. I mean, we see this portrayed in the media all the time. The loudest and most abrasive woman is always right. Speak up, speak loudly and proudly. Do any of these slogans or systems of belief cater to the idea that to act in opposition to this, to be humble or meek, means that you are weak? It sure seems that we like to cater to the loudest or the most prideful, don't we? Ironically, when the world or society caters to what they call the prideful, it's incredibly exclusive because they care about having pride in what matters most to them. Anything else would have you canceled or burned at the stake. It's often, or excuse me, it's not often that you see a commercial with a soft spoken, modestly dressed woman speaking about perfume or trying to sell you fabric softener. I think that needs to be another podcast episode. Where has modesty gone? I keep doing that, don't I? I find new episode inspiration in the middle of an episode. Funny how all these things kind of fall from the same tree. In today's episode, I want to talk about meekness and what it really stands for, as I said earlier, and the difference between its, in my opinion, opposite or antonym, weakness. Now, to truly understand meekness, not as timidity, but as strength under control, I want to go back to some of the most paradoxical warriors in all of history. Some might call them representatives of the upside down kingdom, and I'll explain more what I mean by that in a moment. But let's start with a good old dictionary because that's what we like to do, right, on this podcast. As I often tell my children and my students, for that matter, define your terms. You gotta define your terms. So Webster's dictionary defines the word meek as enduring harm or injury with patience and without resentment. And that's not good enough. Come on, Webster's, do better. I think that implies that one must be injured to exhibit meekness, but I disagree. Hear that, Webster? I disagree with you. I prefer the definition in Easton's Bible Dictionary. It describes meekness as, quote, a calm temper of mind, not easily provoked. I like this bit right here. Listen to this. It says, peculiar promises are made to the meek. And then it states, as example, Matthew chapter 5, verse 5, and Isaiah 66, 2. Now, the verse in Isaiah reads this way. It says, all these things my hand has made, and so all these things came to be, declares the Lord. But this is the one to whom I will look, he who is humble and contrite, or broken, in spirit, and trembles at my word. Now listen closely to this. That word humble in the original Hebrew is ani. It is a word meaning poor, lowly, afflicted, and humble, expressing more of a lack of maybe material wealth or power. Thus, one who is humbled or subdued by their circumstances. It primarily refers to being in an afflicted or wretched state. And in Matthew 5, verse 5, it states, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." The word meek here describes a person marked by humility and gentleness, someone who doesn't chase personal gain, but places their trust and hope in God. The part where it states inherit the earth is a direct reference to Psalm 37, verse 11, which speaks of the ultimate destruction of those who delight in evil, in order that those who hope in the Lord may actually live in peace. There's another word related to ani, which is the word anav or anava, and is used to describe more of a spiritual or moral humility. It is used to describe Moses in Numbers, but we'll get to that more in a sec. Then there's the word dal, another term for humility, but we will stop with the biblical Hebrew lessons here. I know I could talk for another hour. As I've stated previously in the intro, I'm a biblical resource writer and a biblical Hebrew teacher, so you're going to have a hard time finding an episode where I don't mention an ancient word. You're so welcome. I know that's secretly why you listen. But anyway, so essentially what we have as a definition for meekness here or humility is this: one who is not easily provoked, one in whom the Lord looks with favor, because it is a person who has a broken spirit before the Lord, or in other words, knows his need for God and fears his word or respects the word of the Lord, one who will inherit the earth and peace. I think those are some solid definitions. I personally think Webster's needs to read his Bible. All right, remember earlier when I talked about those historical warriors representing the upside down kingdom? Let's get into that for a sec. Those humans of antiquity who paradoxically represent the law and justice and righteousness, but also servitude and humility. Those warriors who had the true ability to flaunt, or what do the kids say now? I heard this recently from the mouth of my daughter. Flex? Is that what they say? Those who can flex their glory in lofty positions, but choose to refrain and lead their communities, choosing to reflect behavior to be emulated. This is one of those things that is so unique and powerful about the biblical narrative in God. He doesn't call the flexors. Does that work for the plural of flex? I don't know. He humbles them repeatedly. He calls those who are not eloquent in speech and beg him to send someone else. He calls for kings who are the youngest and work as shepherds out in the field, those who even a prophet wouldn't choose at first sight. He reminds us over and over again that he does not look at what man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. The Bible is full of meek characters doing amazing things under the watchful eye of the Lord. I want us to look at some powerful examples. Those of you who know me well here are going to shake your heads and think, of course you chose this character, Amie. I may have just given one of my characters away. But anyway, but now, before I introduce these characters, I want you to think for a second of someone, maybe an influencer or a powerful leader or someone you know personally, maybe, who the world would say, yeah, that is someone I'd like to be like. That is success. That is power. That's the opposite of weakness, as described by these individuals. Remember, loud doesn't always represent strength, and softness, most of the time, doesn't represent weakness. We have this backwards. My first example is a man who wrote many manuscripts, which you could say remain on the top seller list and have for hundreds, thousands of years now. He's no stranger to the quill and parchment or stone or papyrus. I'm not sure if he would call himself a fan of sand or of gold. My guess is he would look at the sea or the ocean, for that matter, in a very different way than most of us. He's had an amazing experience with it really since he was a baby. Growing up, he was no stranger to luxury, but also knew what it was to walk in the same clothing for years, relying on God for his next meal. Oh, and he also killed a man, ran for his life, fought off a group of shepherds trying to keep a group of sisters from watering their flock, which, by the way, no one talks about. How tough was he that he was able to fend off a group of shepherds? I would have liked to have seen that personally. But there's something written about him that to me is astounding and really makes me wish I could have traveled with him for like a week. Okay, that's not true. I would have liked to have traveled with him for much longer. For those of you that know me, that's a lie. But I'm about over 1,000 years too late. Listen to what is written about him in the book of Numbers, chapter 12, verse 3. Now, for context, leading up to this verse, his brother and sister here, who were considered prophets themselves, had a bone to pick with our man under the pretense of being upset about the ethnicity of his wife. She was not a native Israelite, but was from Midian. This, however, being a cover for for their jealousy. The Lord had some pretty tough words for our antagonists here. I want you all to know the amount of self control I'm having. By the way, I want to get into the geography and derivative of the word Cush and Midianite here, but I'm not going to this time. You're welcome. So, continuing on, here's what the Lord of Israel had to say to their complaint, to the complaints that his brother and sister had against him. Starting in Numbers chapter 12, verses 3, it reads, Now the man Moses was very meek, more than all people who were on the face of the earth. And suddenly the Lord said to Moses and to Aaron and Miriam, Come out, you three, to the tent of meeting. Uh-oh, family meeting and dad is mad. And the three of them came out, and the Lord came down in the pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward. Now, you know when you're in trouble with your parents, or you were in trouble with your parents, and they have that look, maybe their arms are crossed. Imagine walking toward a pillar of fire here. Okay, it continues in verse 6. And he said, Hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth. That literally is rendered in the Hebrew, pe el pe, mouth to mouth. So he says, With him I speak mouth to mouth, clearly and not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord. Why were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. Now, after this, we find that Miriam, Moses' older sister, is leprous, and Aaron, who also just so happens to have the part time job, by the way, of identifying the leprous, as is stated in Numbers and Leviticus, turns to Moses, the most humble of men, remember, calling him Lord, lowercase l, obviously, and he begs Moses to call on the Lord to heal Miriam, saying they have acted as fools and sinned. So Moses laughs and calls fire down from heaven to consume them both. No, incorrect. So Moses, being the meek man that he is, turns to the Lord and doesn't simply ask or rub it in their faces. In the Hebrew, it says he vayitza'ak. He cries on their behalf. And what does he cry out? El na rafa nala. Oh God, please heal her, please. Which the Lord graciously does after 7 days. Here we have a man who by no means was perfect and certainly didn't have a conventional growing up in Egypt. His life was literally surrendered, albeit to royalty in Egypt. Then, after killing a man for beating an Israelite, fled, and years later, while settled in Midian, tried to convince the Lord that because of his speech, among other things, he was not the man to free his people from slavery. But that is exactly who God called, because that is what God does. Moses was a man who understood his need for God, understood that he was not an eloquent speaker and that he had many flaws, and that without God's help, he couldn't do it. And even holding his staff, having used it to do nothing less than perform signs and part seas through the power of God, still saw himself as a servant of God. God could have called a dark, tall, and handsome young man, the one who went around taking pictures of himself when the Egyptian sunset was just at the right point, casting a beautiful glow around his body and face so that he could stare off maybe towards the Red Sea to get the perfect photo for his social media account. He would write a smooth, humble brag quote, something like, Don't you love it when you don't take the photo takes you? Hashtag living in Egypt. Hashtag workout glow. Hashtag not my king. But God chose Moses, the self controlled warrior. True humility looks like Moses, knowing you're strong because it is the Lord who fights for you. Not you do you, be as loud and proud as you can. Because guess what? It wouldn't have mattered if Moses had had a booming voice and could have persuaded 1,000,000 Israelites to meet him at the edge of the Red Sea. He still needed God to part the waters. That would have been weakness disguised as strength. Moses represented the upside down kingdom. Now, what do you mean by upside down kingdom, Amie? Well, the kingdoms of the earth represent power and strength at the hand of man, popularity, prestige from man, buildings and treasures from man, where time fades and rusts all things. The upside down kingdom, upside down to us anyway, is the kingdom which seeks not his own glory, but that of God's. Representatives of this upside down kingdom seek treasures where, as Jesus states in Matthew, moths and rust, they can't destroy it. An everlasting treasure that comes from God. Not metaphorical treasures either. I think sometimes we get this mixed up as well. This isn't fancy language. God loves to bless us, and he loves to bless us eternally with eternal things. I think that to be truly meek is not to rely on your own strength, which eventually gives out, but to put your hope and strength and ability in God and for God. Now, to be really honest with you, I almost don't want to mention my next example because I know there is simply no way on earth I could do him justice in this amount of time. So please, I humbly ask you to bear with my measly attempt. Did you see what I just did there? Let's talk about that Nazarene Jesus, Yeshua, who, as described in the Gospels, was capable of signs and miracles and whom the demons fled from, but who, to his disciples' amazement, took on the form of a lowly servant and washed their feet. The roads weren't clean and paved back then, friends. Sandals were beds for dust and dirt and sweat. It was not a pretty job. This Jesus, sacrificing his breath, which was granted to him in an excruciating manner by lifting his chest, using whatever balance was offered to him while his hands and feet were nailed to wood, told his neighbor on the cross that he would see him in paradise. He loved a criminal while enduring torture. He loved a man while enduring a slow death. He who had once used the world as his proverbial footstool, as described in Old Testament passages, endured horrific and excruciating Roman torture on a cross, made to kill him by way of slow suffocation, so that anyone who called on his name could ultimately be saved. The ultimate self controlled warrior. Listen to this description for a moment, if you will. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray, we have turned, every one, to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. That's found in Isaiah 53, verses 2 through 6, and it's profoundly countercultural. The Savior of the world arrives not wrapped in power or charisma, but in meekness. The beauty of Christ, the Messiah, the Mashiach, Isaiah suggests, is not in his appearance, it's in his character, his love, and his willingness to bear rejection for the sake of people. It is a distorted thought and rejects biblical values to believe that the loudest person, or the loftiest, or the richest, or the most beautiful, or the most clever is who we should emulate or see as strength. True strength is found in humility, knowing who we are and the gifts we have and using them not for our own gain, but to lift up those around us, to use them for God's glory so that his peace will be our reward, and we might live in the land of the living, remember? Okay, so we've looked at Moses, the prince who became a shepherd, whose strength was shaped by surrender. We've looked, albeit very briefly, at Jesus, Yeshua, the Lord of glory who knelt to wash his disciples' feet, who conquered not by striking, but by suffering. And now, perhaps unexpectedly, we turn to a man from our own age. I had to add this one in. A man with calloused hands and a hungry family, James J. Braddock, from the Cinderella Man. Have you seen Cinderella Man? It is one of my all-time favorite movies. I love the story of James Braddock so much. Y'all need to watch this movie. It's so good. Anyway, Braddock was no prophet. He wasn't a messiah. He was a boxer from New Jersey who went from the lights of Madison Square Garden to the dim, cold shadow of the Great Depression. He was once celebrated and then forgotten, once seen as strong, then ultimately broken. But here's the thing. Meekness isn't about the absence of power, it's about what you do with it when it returns. When Braddock fought his way back into the ring, he did it not for pride, not for applause, but for love, for his wife, for his children, for the dignity of honest work. The same hands that once fought for fame now fought to keep milk on the table. That's the quiet nobility of meekness, power restrained by compassion. There's a scene where he returns the government relief money after he finally earns a few good purses again. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't see myself ever having the strength to do that, but it's really remarkable. No one was watching, no one demanded it in that sense, but he did it because it was the right thing to do. That's the heart of the meek, not loud, not self justifying, but quietly faithful. Moses laid down his staff before God. Jesus laid down his life, and Braddock, you could say in his own small human way, laid down some of his pride. Meekness, you see, always has the same rhythm, strength surrendered for the sake of love, whether in the desert, on a cross, or in the boxing ring. Here's a question that I'm going to ask myself too. When we look at examples of meekness, strength, and boldness through humility, do the examples we see around us that the world would have us copy offer true examples of strength? Or is it weakness in disguise? It kind of seems to me that all the world has to do is offer a good beat, music, with a beautiful person with a megaphone shouting a brace of things, and we blindly follow because someone that beautiful and that well spoken and that loud and that good of a dancer couldn't be weak. You know what? Webster's dictionary did such a remarkable job defining meek. Let's see what it says about weakness. Now, it lays out four examples here, and listen to this. I thought this was interesting. So, the first definition says meekness, or excuse me, weak, to be weak is mentally or intellectually deficient. The second one says not firmly decided. The third one says resulting from or indicating lack of judgment or discernment. And the fourth one says not able to withstand temptation or persuasion. And the example that they give here is the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. There you go, Webster's. Low key inserting the words of Jesus as an example. I'm taking credit for that. I think Webster's heard my complaint earlier and quickly fixed it online in about 3 minutes' time. Now, if we pause and really think about using an example of someone, as I asked you to think of earlier, someone who the world might say appears powerful or someone you want to emulate. Let's look at these definitions again. Resulting from or lacking judgment or discernment, not able to withstand temptation or persuasion, not firmly decided, mentally or intellectually deficient. Does your example exhibit more of weakness or more of meekness, the examples that I gave earlier? Because I would argue the vast majority of people, and I fall into this category too, that we maybe look at times as people who we want to emulate or people that are powerful or people that have good things to say because human beings throughout history can exhibit points of weakness. I mean, we all exhibit points of weakness. I think that's a given. But overall, are they doing things for their own gain, or are they using their gifts to help the weak to help people, to show love, to exhibit love? I think that's a fair question. I think that's something that we need to be asking as well. What are we personally emulating? Are we showing humility in our actions and what we do, and knowing that, if we have gifts or talents, which we all do, we all have God-given gifts. There's not a person on this earth that is not gifted in some way. Are we using those to honor each other and to lift each other up and to love one another? Or are we using those to gain attention, to garner praise and admiration? That's a hard thing to do. That's a hard pill to swallow. I know. I fall into this too. But I think what we need to do is we need to, what do I say? Pause and think. Think about what we are trying to emulate. Think about what the world is offering versus what we should be emulating versus the things that will lead us to peace and prosperity and ultimately to everlasting possessions, to treasures. It's easy to want the quick and the now, and desire wealth, desire popularity, desire power, what we perceive as power. But what is true power? I would argue true power is meekness, it's humility, it's knowing these gifts that you have and being able to withhold giving a really well crafted insult to someone who deserves it because they insulted you first. It's holding the door open for that person who cut you off. It's showing love, it's emulating love. And I think this is something that I would love to see us pause and think about more often. What is meekness? And what is power? And what is strength? And also, what is weakness? Because again, weakness is so often portrayed as a kind of power, portrayed as strength. I certainly see that. So that's what I have for you this time. I hope that you all have a wonderful week looking for ways to showcase humility. And as always, know that you have value, were created for unique purpose, and are deeply loved by God. Ma'asalem, v'leitraut. We'll chat soon.